now exactly 1 week to the 7th inauguration ceremony in Nigeria's Fourth Republic, and President-elect Bola Tinubu will take the oath of office. We are counting down to the historic May 29 handover. And remember that you can share your thoughts with us on Twitter using the hashtag countdown to May 29. Remember to mention at TVC News NG and at Nifemi Oguntoye. Thanks for joining us on the program. No less than 65 world leaders from Africa, Europe and America are expected at this event, including heads of state, past presidents, diplomats, heads of international organizations, as well as prominent Nigerians and representatives of the UK, Canada, France, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Pakistan, and there's a long list of other countries that are expected at this high-profile event. Let's take a break now. When we return, I'll be joined by the Secretary to the Government of the Federation, Boss Mustapha, who's also Chairman of the Transition Council. Stay with us. Secretary to the Government of the Federation is also Chairman of the Transition Council, Boss Mustapha. Thank you for joining us on the program. Let's begin with the theme for the 2023 transition, Nigeria Better Together. I know you've talked about how historically significant this inauguration is to the country and the continent, but talk to us about why you have chosen this theme and what it means for Nigeria at this time.
Well, thank you for having me on the program. I believe that the decision of the Presidential Transition Council to adopt the theme that we have adopted for this inauguration is informed by several factors. One, we have come a long way, having had a continuous processes of democracy for the last 24 years unbroken. The 7th consecutive inauguration, we felt that in spite of whatever issues the 2023 election threw up, we are still better together as a nation and as a people. That's substantially one of the reasons why we adopted the theme.
Absolutely. It's Nigeria's 7th consecutive inauguration ceremony since 1999, and by next year, we will be celebrating 25 years of unbroken democratic rule. Speak to us about just how significant Nigeria's political stability is for the continent, especially with what's happening in countries like Sudan, Mali, and others.
Oh, the Nigerian enterprise is of absolute significance to the African continent. We are the largest economy in terms of population. We are about 220, and it is expected that very soon in the next decade, we will be the 3rd most populated nation in the world. So the world is looking up to Nigeria, one, to continue to deepen its democracy, sustain democratic ethics and tenets, and also provide the effective kind of leadership that is desirous on the African continent. I truly agree with you that there have been disturbing developments, particularly within the West African sub-region of recent. And I believe that one of the reasons why the world is expecting Nigeria to succeed in its democratic enterprise is because our shared population alone can be a major challenge if we are conflicted as a nation, and there is a lot of upheavals in our country. So I believe that the world is expecting us to succeed, and they are looking up to us, and that's why you had the deluge of election observers that came into the country in the 2023 election. As a matter of fact, the 2023 election is one of the most watched elections globally. And for obvious reasons, like I said, our shared population can create a very serious challenge to the African continent. And we need to provide the kind of leadership that we have provided so far, so that at least people on the continent of Africa, looking up to Nigeria, would say for sure, if a country like Nigeria, as diverse as we are, with all sorts of tendencies, are able to make it right, then they have hope in their nations. So I believe this election has created that avenue for the world to appreciate the modest efforts that we have been able to achieve as a country. Like you rightly said, next year we'll be celebrating 25 years of unbroken democracy. It has never happened in this country, if you look back at our political evolution and development. So we need to make merry and rejoice, pat ourselves on the back. We're not there yet as a nation, but I believe that this is a step forward.
Unfortunately, SGF, not everyone sees it the way you're looking at it. You know, just last week you mentioned President Buhari's commitment to a seamless transfer of power, you know, but also we've also, you know, witnessed some agitations in some quarters for an interim government, which has now been highlighted by the DSS, you know, the police and even the military. Is that something your council is concerned about?
Well, we have averted our minds to that. We've discussed it at different levels, and we have come to one logical conclusion, that one, our constitution does not contemplate that happening. Our constitution is sacrosanct. Section 132, 1 and 2 are very explicit. There shall be an election to the office of the president. And Section 2 provides for the timelines. And Section 285 is very explicit that if anybody disputes the results of the election, he has 21 days within which to file his petition in the election petitions of the different levels. Thereafter, the election petition tribunals have 180 having 180 days within which to determine the election petition. And the same section, subsection, I think 7 of the section 285 of the Constitution, even avails you the opportunity to go on appeal, another 60 days. So our Constitution and our electoral laws have provided sufficiently for disputes to be settled. There shouldn't be any cause for agitations, and the call for interim administration is unknown to our laws unless we decide to amend our Constitution and our electoral processes. That is a far-fetched call. But we appeal to people to litigate it through the processes that have been set up by our Constitution and by our enabling laws like the Electoral Act. And at the end of the day, the truth about it is that this is not the only election that has been litigated. 79, all litigated the election of Shagari. Subsequently, we've had litigation. The only election that has not been litigated in our history, particularly the last 24 years, is only the election of 2015, where Jonathan conceded defeat. So the truth about it is that we have processes through which we should resolve our disputes, and I think that should not provide any room for any anxiety. I know losing elections is a very painful exercise. As a young man, I ran for the governorship of Adamawa in 1991. I lost that election, but the same news item that carried the victory of my opponent carried my congratulatory message, and I didn't lose anything. It's a contest that you go into. You either win or lose. So I would appeal to those that are litigating this election to continue in the processes, because our Constitution and our electoral laws have laid the framework for that. But they should allow peace to prevail so that we will have a seamless, very seamless, and very, very, very open and historically significant transmission of power to the next president.
Absolutely.
Who is,
Beyond your appeal, I also know that you have a committee that oversees, the security aspect of the inauguration. What are you doing in that regard, particularly with all of the intelligence we are getting from, military operatives?
Well, we are working towards ensuring that nothing unpleasant happens. We are putting every processes in place. The security apparatus, the armed forces, the lead agency for civil security is the Nigerian police. They are putting everything that ought to be put in place to ensure that we have a seamless transition of power. We are mindful of the fact that agitators will continue to exploit whatever weaknesses there are in the system. But I can tell you that we think we have put a cordon of security around the premises and around all facilities where events will take place for the transition process, and I believe that we are on top of the game. You've had the IGP address the press on that. DSS have raised the red alerts, but that in any way will not deter us from proceeding to ensure that there's a seamless transfer of power, which is provided for by our Constitution.
We understand that world leaders from Africa, Europe, and America are scheduled to attend the inauguration ceremony in Abuja. Perhaps you can give us an idea of those who have now confirmed to attend the event.
Quite a number of them have confirmed, but because of diplomatic privilege, I'm not in a position to disclose who and who. We live in difficult times. So countries of the world have a way of making sure that only on need-to-know basis, the movement of their heads of government. But I can assure
the security concerns you've expressed, but perhaps you can give us a number we can work with.
Well, I would advise you cross-check that with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, because the countries that we have invited deal directly with them. You know the processes. They go through non-verbal to issue instructions, send messages. I might not be in a position to give you the exact number and to also tell you who and who are coming. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs would have those figures now. At the appropriate moment, when they finalize the figures, they will transmit it to the Transition Council for effective placement and effective...
All right. Fair enough. You mentioned last week that the handover of transition documents will happen on Thursday, May 25, right? According to the schedule.
Yeah.
Give us an update on the transition process and how far all the committees have gone.
Well, we are doing very well. We are doing very well. All the committees are working assiduously. You know, this is the first time we are having a very structured transition, which is backed up by an executive order number 14, which was signed by President Muhammadu Buhari, and asked me to chair that committee, which is a 24-man committee. And on it, we have the representation of the President-elect. Ahmed Bola Tinubu has 2 representatives on the Transition Council, and they've been working with us. As a matter of fact, they are embedded in some of the strategic committees that we have. One of them is serving on the Security Facilities and Intelligence Committee. The other one is serving on the Transition Documents Committee. And all the committees are working very well. I chair one of the committees, which is the Inauguration Committee. And the President-elect has his representation in the 13 subcommittees of the Inauguration Committee. So we are working hand in gloves, and I believe that they are quite happy and satisfied with the level of preparations. They are also satisfied with the contents of the transition documents, which will be handed over to the incoming president, the President-elect Senator Bola Tinubu, on Thursday, the 25th. We are ready to go. And that day also, he will be decorated with his national honor of GCFR. His vice would equally be decorated with the national honor of GCON. I have right in front of me here their certificates which have been endorsed by President Muhammadu Buhari. So we are set to go in all the events of the that we have outlined at the press conference. I can assure you that we are going to have a spectacular, seamless transition of power.
We're talking about the press conference. You specifically called for what you called a further specific legislation on presidential transition in Nigeria, as it is in other leading democratic nations. What will the content look like, and have you started pushing for it?
We have. I already have a draft that I would ask Mr. President to send to the National Assembly as an executive bill. That will be considered by the 10th Assembly. I can tell you that because prior to this time, I had set up a transition tax team which undertook working visits to two different countries. A team went to the United States, which has had a legislation, a transition act from 1963. Another team went to Kenya to understudy what they have put in place from the year 2020, I think. They have a legislation too that governs presidential transition. This study to us has been very rewarding. We have taken critical lessons from this study to us because their transition committees operate differently. And we have married it with our own home experience, and we have developed a proposed bill that, like I said, I will get Mr. President to pass it to the National Assembly, and the 10th Assembly will consider that. We need a structured transition process. In the states, it can be chaotic, particularly when you have an opposition party taking over from a ruling party. It can be chaotic. It ought not to be so. We are civilized people. We've been architects and practitioners of democracy in this country. We should learn to do things orderly. And I feel very satisfied and gratified that under my watch, I've been able to create a transition framework, which we are working with now as an executive order, but eventually it will become an act of the parliament.
In the final days of President Buhari, a lot of people have been reviewing, his administration's performance. And I know that you chaired the Presidential Task Force on COVID-19, overseeing and coordinating the, multi-sectoral intergovernmental efforts to contain the spread of the virus. You might not really be a judge in that regard as to how you are fared. I just want to give you a few minutes to talk to Nigerians about how you think this administration dealt with that season, which is now being talked about as perhaps one of the highlights of the outgoing administration.
Truly, I can say that our national response was a remarkable response, considering the very, very weak health infrastructure we have in this country. We came up with a model. We were the first country to close down our borders. We did very aggressive things. The beauty about it is that Nigerians were united about the response. I remember at different times I had to deal with NIREC, which is the Interreligious Council of Nigeria, because some of the lockdowns were going to affect places of worship. At times I had to deal with the National Council of Traditional Rulers because we wanted the buy-in of the leaders in the local community so that when we speak, they will re-echo our voices in the rural communities so that adherence and obedience to some of the guidelines that we had put in place would not be a burden on the people. We also worked in unison with the corporate world. You remember our engagement with COVID, where they came in and provided isolation facilities, provided resources for the procurement of PPEs, test kits, and also our intervention with the global community through the platform of the United Nations Basket Fund. So our response has been adjudged to be one of the best globally, not nationally or on the African continent, one of the best. It has become a reference point because of the resilience of Nigerians and the determination of Nigerians to ensure that we were not ravaged as predicted by the global community by the COVID-19 experience. And on even the economic front, most countries went into recession. But believe you me, after 2 quarters, Nigeria exited recession. Up till today, there are nations of the world that are still suffering and they are still in recession. They have not been able to exit as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, which later was exacerbated by the Ukrainian-Russian conflict, which disrupted supply chains. But I can say with a sense of satisfaction that as a people, we stood up to the challenge of the COVID-19 pandemic, and we resolved as a people that we were going to do whatever it was going to cost us as a people and as a nation to ensure that we provided a safety net around our communities and around our family. Unfortunately, we lost a few people in direct relation to our population. The world globally lost about 6.6 million people, while in Nigeria, the figure still stands at about 3,155, which I believe one soul loss as a result of COVID-19 is regrettable, but I think we've been able to put up a response that has stood the test of time. COVID-19 has been degraded in terms of being a global health challenge by the WHO.
Your Excellency, perhaps we'll find time post-inauguration to sit down with you and hear your view about this after this administration. But I must say a big thank you. Finally, as we leave in just 1 minute, you have spoken about how significant, how historic May 29 is, how proud Nigerians must be. I just wanted to speak to Nigerians who are watching right now about the coming days and why they must be on board.
Nigerians are very hopeful people. I would want to appeal to us as a people and as a country that the world is watching us, and we've been given an opportunity to demonstrate that Nigerian spirit, the spirit of excellence, the spirit of perseverance, and the spirit that tells us that we are on a trajectory of growth, and the future should be a hopeful one. My appeal is that we should look into the future. The mantra of the incoming president is a renewed hope. That should keep us alive. That should give us all the impetus of striving to develop our nation and keep our nation united. Thank you.
We're counting on that. Secretary to the Government of the Federation and Chairman of the Presidential Transition Council, Mustapha, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us on the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
And that's the countdown today. We're following closely government's program as we count down to May 29, Inauguration Day, where the President-elect and the Vice President-elect will take the oath of office. Thank you for watching this episode. I am Nifemi Oguntoye. See you again tomorrow.